everyone to what is ostensibly the fourth in our series post the consultations in terms of what we've deemed jumpstarting the implementation of a rare disease drug strategy. We really appreciate all of you who are here for our first 3 sessions, and they are on our website in case you missed any of them and would like to just hear them again. We're going to try to pull off the notes from those and put them into a package for you as well, so that we will have that also for your reference and also for going forward. So this fourth one really is looking at what kind of an infrastructure do we need in terms of, as we say, jumpstarting this implementation of a rare drug strategy. It's actually webinar 4, but that's okay. We will forget that and move on. And it is actually June 17th. So you want to back one up, and so this is the fourth one. We just thought we'd present you real briefly because the rare disease strategy that we presented now almost 6 years ago. Okay, so those are the webinars we've had. Okay, moving to the next one. Okay, we thought we'd just give you a very, very quick reminder of the 5 goals of a rare disease strategy that we presented now almost 6 years ago now. Where this is the perfect setup for what we're trying to do in terms of a rare drug strategy. And the 5 goals that were identified, and certainly they weren't unique to us, really based on what was happening in the European community and in other countries. Improving early detection and prevention, so early diagnosis, including now, of course, much more updated diagnostic opportunities, providing timely, equitable, evidence-based informed care. And again, this will dovetail into what you're going to hear about in terms of creating a networked centers of excellence. Third is enhancing community support, which obviously includes not only the patient organizations, but also taking advantage of all the supports within the community. The heart of where we're going with the rare disease strategy is access to promising therapies. And the 5th one is promoting innovative research. And you're going to hear some of that as well. So those are the 5 pillars, and including in there will be, other things that we've talked about going along, having the patient registries, making sure, as we said, we've got this wraparound in terms of from early diagnosis all the way through to the collection of real world evidence. Next slide. So at the end of the consultation from this past April, in our recommendations on how we can actually move forward on the promise of a rare disease drug strategy to be implemented in 2022, we had proposed a series of 12 action steps that would be needed in order to get this drug strategy beginning, and the actions that need to take place. And I won't read through all of them, but you can have them for your review as well. All of it has been covered more or less in the first in these 4 webinars, but I'm also going to talk about where we're going to go next with this. And some of this, what we're saying is that for the most part, when we see that jumpstart action to do now, recognizes the fact that a lot of these building blocks, a lot of this infrastructure is already in place. And you're going to hear from 4 or 5 of our key stakeholders that are doing these things that we can pull together in terms of this rare drug strategy and, creating the true opportunities for a rare disease strategy. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is what we're doing today. Panel 1 is what we call assessing and accessing rare therapies. Yes, we can. And I'm so amazed to have 2 amazing presenters for us. Karen Fosse, who I think, as we all know, is no stranger to Canada, has done a great deal in terms of her contributions in Canada, in HTA, in terms of the many kinds of activities she's been, including activities for us here at CORD. And we're so delighted that she's agreed to come to speak around evidence around Impact HTA, which is a model around applying HTA to advanced therapies, but rare disease therapies. And I think we've asked her to do it in a very, very high level, quick overview, but I think we'll give you the essence and we'll talk about where we're going to go with the next. The next person is built nicely on that is Allison Wills from 20 Cents, who's going to talk about outcomes-based agreements, what is needed and where we are now. Again, exactly what we're talking about. And Bill's going to moderate that. Next, please. Oh, these are the bios, and I won't go into much, except I do want to say something about Karen. And, Karen, has a long career. She's a statistician in pharmaceutical industry and medicines regulation. She has been, I think some of you know, with the Scottish Medicine Consortium, but even more than that, has been a consultant in many, many areas. She has been chair of and has been part of so many European and international panels and expert groups. And it says she was named one of the top 100 practicing scientists in the UK. But let me just also say tangentially, and we had the discussion this morning, for all of us who are involved in patient engagement in HTA, let me say without any kind of caveats on this, that without Karen Fosse, we would not be where we are today. Karen was the pioneer in terms of patient engagement and was the continued champion in patient engagement many years ago, more than 20 years ago, when nobody was really thinking about it, when nobody actually could figure out why on earth we wanted to bring patients in. And she not only helped to create the processes, especially within the Scottish Medicine Consortium, but bringing that internationally. She created models for how that could be done. And then she was heavily engaged in the training of patients to become experts in HTA, at least in terms of the input. And so, especially at HTAI, where she absolutely founded the patient engagement, I guess there are working groups there, and certainly was my first mentor in this space. So kudos to Karen. And as I say, all of us who are doing this right now, we probably would not be doing it, and certainly not doing the way we are if it had not been for Karen. So huge kudos to Karen. And also then really appreciate Allison Wills, and you'll really appreciate kind of what she is able to bring to this whole environment in terms of outcomes-based agreements and how we can use what are certainly systems that are in place now. Next slide. I think we'll just do this all together. Panel 2 then. We're going to talk about building on the health and infrastructure. And some of these, are panelists who've been with us before. Kevin Quall from the Rare Blood Disorders Clinic, TGH, Terry Lacaze, who is with an amazing network that is such a cornerstone in terms of helping us move forward in terms of pediatric research, the maternal, infant, child, and youth research investment, MISRIN. Michael May, who again is a real stellar, unique individual in Canada, who heads up the Center for Commercialization of Regenerative Medicines, and how he's using the center to actually leverage the research and the development of rare disease therapies and other therapies as well. And then Humaira Osman, whom you've had the privilege of having speak to us many times, who's going to talk on behalf of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, what is existing currently in terms of an infrastructure that actually serves as a model. I won't read through all these. You can have the bios for later. Not that they aren't worthwhile reading, but I'm sure that they don't need to have that level to give credibility to what they're doing. And then our last panelists are going to actually bring us home and really talk about what they heard and help maybe direct some of the Q&A around it. Heather Logan, who, as is from CADIT, is the Vice President of Pharmaceutical Reviews at CADIT. I won't go through her entire biography, and she's also really a very strong patient advocate and patient engagement. So we're really excited that she's taken this on. And Deborah Marshall, who kindly was here last week to talk about the role in of what the research community and also in terms of the special institutes that she's been involved in, but as we know, has a long, wide-ranging kinds of expertise, and is hopefully going to be really very much involved with us as we're moving forward in setting up this infrastructure for rare drug strategy. So just to really quickly say that what we hope to do, and I call it the pre-election activities work stream. So for all of us in Canada, we know that there is likely to be an election in the fall. We also know that you know, we have just until about the end of the year to really make some strong proposals for what this rare drug strategy is going to look like. And once an election is called, a lot of action is going to grind to a halt. So we're in a race to try to get as much done as we can before this election is called, so that we've got something that the minute that election is over and whichever party is absolutely in power, that we can hand this over and say, okay, let's get going. So this is our goal. So 4 work streams that we've identified, but there could be more. And I give them to you now because I want you to think about whether or not you want to participate in these and how you want to participate in these. One is the Collaborative Canadian Network for Rare Diseases. I won't go into it too much, but we're so excited that we're going to be launching this consultation and discussion in the next few weeks. And it really is an amazing opportunity for us to set up this network, really drawing from the rare disease strategy, but even more drawing from the WHO RDI Collaborative Global Network for Rare Diseases, and that we would love to see this as part and parcel of. So this is an exciting opportunity for us to create a national hub, but would also be part of a global community for rare diseases. The second one, as you might imagine, is looking at health technology assessment for rare disease treatments. And really, I cannot say this is, you know, the timing in having both Karen and Allison speak today. This is what we want to talk about. And I think you'll hear from Karen's framework that this is something that hopefully we can just pull right into and really talk about how we're going to work. We're so delighted that CADIS has been an integral part of these discussions internationally, because again, we know rare diseases are international. And the more we can see these assessment, methodologies working internationally, the more I think we'll be able to assure that they're going to be, truly not just appropriate here, but are going to be building on what is happening in the data collection, monitoring in international communities. And really a big focus of it, as we talked last week, is around the real world evidence. Patient data, registries, and real world evidence. So this is again something that we're going to be focusing on. We're really thrilled to have partners like CIHR, Health Canada, CADIS, coming together to really think about how this is actually going to be set up and how it's going to be working in certainly not just for rare disease drugs, but I think right across disease areas. But we do know it's going to be a foundational element. Real world evidence is key to our being able to bring in these therapies with the high uncertainties, being able to make them available in a timely fashion. And we really want to make sure that Canada is in place to be able to be involved, to collect, use, and to be able to build upon what's happening right across the country, but internationally. And then the last one that I put out here is really hardest for us to think about, right? The value-based pricing of rare disease treatment. We've been all struggling with the whole question around pricing. What is the right pricing? What is appropriate pricing? What is, what's affordability? We want to do a bit of a reset with this and really talk about, what is a realistic picture of drug prices and costs in Canada? What should it be? And we want to address also the fact that we have private and public drug plans in Canada, and this actually is different from many other countries. And we also want to talk very strongly about what the realistic assessment of Canadian drug prices within these countries. Where should we be? What should we be doing? And how do we strike that right balance? And we want to take it all the way back, and not just say, okay, what is PMPRB doing? What is happening in terms of the PCPA? We cannot just be grounded by that. We really want to talk about how do we think about, the right kinds of pricing? What should the budget impact be? What can we do to ensure sustainability? Because it is a core to making sure we've got that long term. So I didn't want to overdo it, but these are coming up. So we realize a lot of people are going to be doing other things this summer, but we also hope that you're going to be able to take part in many of these activities with us, because it is important that we're all able to contribute to it. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bill, who's going to take us through our first panel and also give you some instructions around using your chat lines, etc.
Thanks very much, Durhan, and thanks to all the panelists and the participants. It's great to see so many people and friends out there. As I said in the chat group, hope to see you in person again soon. I think we're going to turn it right to panel one, who is going to set up with two presentations. And then I'll keep an eye on what's going on in the chat. Just a reminder, this video is being recorded, so it'll be available offline. If we don't get to all of your questions, we'll just get in touch and we'll do our best to do so later. Yeah, I'll be back on in about 20 minutes, actually, hopefully about 10 minutes, however long it takes you, Karen, to go through your presentation, to pass the baton over to Allison with 20 cents, and then lead a short Q&A before panel 2. But Karen, over to you. Thank you so much, and go ahead.
Thank you very much, Bill, and to Derhane for inviting me. It's great. The virtual world does have some positives, and I'm sitting here in Scotland, but it's great to be with you all virtually. I'm here today to talk about the Impact HTA appraisal framework that is suitable for rare disease treatments that we launched less than a month ago. This has been part of a research that is funded by the European Commission, and obviously the views are my own, they are not the views of the European Commission. This work has been going on over 3.5 years. It contained a number of work streams, and I'm going to briefly talk to you about those work streams. So the first thing we did was seek to identify how different countries were appraising rare disease treatments, whether they were making any differentiations between rare and ultra rare. And in the EU, you, I think, know we have an orphan medicinal product regulation, but we found that some countries were subgrouping that and looking at ultra rare with various definitions, often with a prevalence of less than 1 in 50,000. And what we found was that some countries were adapting their standard appraisal processes in a variety of ways. Some were simply adding more weight to rarity, and others had completely separate processes. Like in England, there's a nice highly specialized technology process. We originally had 32 countries involved in this, and Canada was one of those. We started looking at the different ways in which processes were being adapted and identified 4 different elements. Firstly, we looked at the evidence that was being submitted to these processes, then the so-called critical assessment of the evidence, the appraisal, the deliberative process, and pricing and reimbursement. And we decided not to cover pricing and reimbursement, but to focus on the first 3 elements, because pricing and reimbursement is more challenging because of the confidential nature of that, whereas for many of the other elements, they are public and we were able to explore them more fully. So we have published all those country, what we call vignettes, on our website, and I've given you the link to our website, and Canada is indeed on that list, and that shows the standard appraisal processes and how they differ for rare disease treatments. And within the EU, we've linked with Orphanet, which is our kind of go-to rare disease database. I'm sure you may have seen it. And within Orphanet, when you look for any rare disease under other information, it links through to our website. So we've been keen to engage with all stakeholders. That was the basis of our research. We then wanted to get into a lot more detail. I come from an HTA background. I've set up HTA bodies. And we wanted to explore the nuances between these adapted processes as they were stated on paper to what was actually happening and how decisions were being made. We worked with a social anthropologist and we undertook formal ethnographic research to observe appraisal committees and to interview their members to explore more about why they had made certain statements and their views on evidence and, for example, stakeholder inputs. So we worked with the Scottish Medicines Consortium and with NICE in different committees, and you can see the different types of drugs here. And we were lucky that in Canada, the CDEC meetings moved virtually, and given our good connections with Cardiff, they granted us permission to observe their private CDEC meeting. And an observation required us, a number of researchers, we documented what everybody said. And we also documented final reports. So we took final reports, and here's an example of a page from a NICE report for Veretogene Neparvec for inherited retinal disorder. We looked at the issues that were coming forward and what each of the different groups had said, so the critical assessors, but we tried to seek out where there was patient input and determine whether it had made a difference, likewise for clinical input. And then we looked at the committee conclusion, and we did that for all of those drugs that you've seen. That created a very big report, and we had 30 detailed interviews. This submission alone was 700 pages, and the committee was almost 5 hours. Alongside that piece of work, we did 2 in-depth methodological analyses. We know that in rare disease treatments, quality of life is really, really important, and that some treatments don't aim to lengthen life, but they aim to improve quality of life. But that often quality of life evidence is poor in the appraisal of rare disease treatments. And we wanted to explore why that was the case. And we've issued a number of publications about that. And this relates both to the determination of added benefit and in economic modeling, where we use health state utility values. So we've looked at that in more detail. We also looked at outcome-based managed entry agreements, but I'm not going to dwell on that too much because Alison will talk more about that. But just to say, we worked with stakeholders at NICE who are involved in these agreements. And in NICE, the patient groups play a vital role, both in the design of the data collection agreements, but also the monitoring and the support of patients in these outcome-based agreements where access is given, but data needs to be collected. And there is a formal agreement of the way in which patients receive treatment in those conditions. We also did a number of case studies, and we did particular work in Italy, where they have a very strong process for this. So our finding was that even in countries where they say they consider other things beyond clinical and cost effectiveness, we weren't sure that the other elements of value were being considered appropriately or in a balanced fashion. So our main recommendation is you need to think beyond clinical and cost effectiveness, because that is the limit of many countries. In Eastern Europe, it's a particular problem. The willingness to pay threshold is written in legislation. We think you need to consider evidence around other elements which are driven by the principles of your society. So they may be equality, encouraging innovation, whatever they are. And that might lead you to consider so-called other domains in the appraisal. And in rare diseases, the nature of the condition, the severity of the condition is particularly important. Patient, carer, and family impacts. And this is something new we're saying, that for rare diseases, family impacts is really important and should be specifically considered. Organizational issues, particularly important with the newer innovative therapies where there may be a few specialized centers that are providing it. And ethical issues, really important, particularly for cell and gene therapies. So we think there should be a clear set of domains which are considered for all appraisals. But then there may be so-called decision modifiers that are applied to an individual treatment when it comes for appraisal. And these could be consideration of things like severity, rapid progression, premature death, unmet need, children, all factors that we see affecting many rare disease treatments. Where we saw more dubiety was in the case of rarity. So should rarity itself be a modifier? And there were questions about that. But we actually think that most rare disease treatments, those that are high cost, would actually be considered by those other elements of severity, rapid progression, etc. This led us to create an appraisal framework that is suitable for rare diseases, that tries to ensure the appraisal of rare diseases is fair, given the paucity of evidence we are bound to have, given the small number of patients that can be treated in clinical trials. So we have 4 recommendations related to evidence submissions and critical assessment, 4 related to appraisal, and 1 related to iterative clinical and patient input. And you can read more detail about these in our framework. And I'm just going to quickly skip through them. Bill, could I have another 3 minutes, or would you like me to stop now?
No, this is fantastic, Karen, and very timely for Canada, but I'm sure Heather Logan from CADIT will explain why later, but take another couple minutes for sure. Thanks for doing the time check.
Okay, thank you, because I know you're running out of time. So the first thing is we think that the entire HTA process should be shaped around your chosen domains. Here are domains that you might choose. And what we then think is all submission templates should consider each of these domains. So for example, a patient group submission should have a section on nature of condition if in your country you see that's important. Ethical issues, clinical issues, organizational issues, because what we know is in rare diseases, there's not only a paucity of clinical evidence, but there's a paucity of knowledge about the care pathway. There are diversity issues, and often patients and clinicians have important insights that can contribute to all of the domains. And we think that expert review forms and critical assessment processes should consider all of these. And the first thing we're saying is that we want the best possible information from industry. So they should do the best trials possible. And even for small populations, randomized controlled trials are possible, but that they should do all they can to reduce bias. They should make economic models that are not overly complex and make consistent assumptions. And then they should be able to provide information about those other domains, not just clinical and cost effectiveness. And we should all do all we can to get evidence from other sources. So I've mentioned stakeholder submissions, but HTA bodies, for example, might want to do literature reviews. And we were very much influenced by the literature reviews, which CADIT is now doing for the ethical aspects, building on a UNETA core model. We think that evidence should be critically assessed fairly, so recognizing that there are small patient populations. And for economic models, we know these are difficult to construct because we don't understand the natural history well. But actually, patients and clinicians need to be asked about the disease states and some of the heart of the economic model. And for that, we need industry to create transparent economic models that experts can get involved and comment on. Then moving on to appraisal, this is key. We would recommend that there is a bespoke committee for rare disease treatments, or where that's not possible, that any general appraisal committee has several rare disease specialists on it. So particularly covering pediatric and adult rare diseases. And that committee members require training at the outset to use the domains and the modifiers and to balance evidence and to be able to take leniency where it's needed. The deliberative appraisal discussion should then be driven by those domains of decision maker and use of modifiers. It should be explicit in every appraisal what modifiers are being brought to bear. And what we're particularly calling for is that any elements of patient benefit that are not studied in the clinical evidence or appearing in the economic modeling are clearly stated, because what we recognize is sometimes that decisions are being made not only on poor clinical studies, but on poor economic models, but the committees aren't taking account of that. We also make recommendations about outcome-based managed entry agreements, and we provide tools, but I'm not going to go into that because Alison will present on that. Then underpinning all this, we think that iterative clinical and patient input is important, right from scoping of the appraisal. And we would recommend that there is a patient story that is videoed and presented to all assessors and committee members at the beginning of the appraisal so they can understand the context and then look at the evidence that is presented to them. In terms of critical assessment of evidence, we think clinical expert input here is really important. And for appraisal, when you're trying to balance these different evidence parts, we think clinical and patient expert input there is important. I'm not going to go into this, but just to say, I think that there are roles for HTA bodies to support this. And in terms of patient group submissions, I think we can improve them. And one thing I would say to you all is one of the most impactful things we saw was the presentation of a day in the life of a patient with cystic fibrosis. And we provide it in our guide, and it was very, very impactful. I'm going to stop presenting there, and I look forward to the panel discussion later.
Thanks so much, Karen, and a great setup for Alison. As we continue to build the infrastructure, just one quick comment. We've come a long way on HTA and what patients and clinicians can do to help influence, engage, and responsibly bring forward their positions. And it's amazing that you got onto the inside of some of these meetings to figure out what's going on and how to make them better. So I really hope that we can have you back to Canada more often by virtual or in person. Alison, over to you to keep on building the infrastructure with some outcomes-based agreements. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill, and thank you to Karen. I'm going to now take that one piece of the framework that Karen was talking about, outcomes-based agreements, and zoom into Canada and zoom into the opportunity here that we have and the work that's being done on implementing outcomes-based agreements in Canada. So I'm from 20 Cents, and I'm also the co-chair of the RWE Outcomes-Based Agreement Working Group. So we're going to get into some of the work that group's been doing specifically on this topic, implementing outcomes-based agreements for our country here. So today, on the agenda, I've got 4 things for you. OBAs and rare disease therapies, why focus on OBA implementation, we'll chat a bit about that. And then look at the building blocks of outcomes-based agreement implementation in Canada and specific initiatives that can help ground everyone in specific work that's being done in this country to move, advance this opportunity and put infrastructure in place so that OBAs are ready when needed. Finally, how you can help to advance OBA in Canada. I haven't asked for everyone, and then we'll have some time for the Q&A as Bill mentioned. So just to ground everyone, what is an outcomes-based agreement? It's an agreement between a manufacturer and a payer in which the manufacturer will issue a refund or a rebate to the patient based on how well the therapy performs in a real-world patient population. And this is measured against an agreed-upon, predefined set of benchmarks. So essentially, the agreement, the market access agreement, would have an element of data collection to generate further evidence, and then evaluate based on that. But there's also commercial terms tied to that evidence. So those 2 pieces are really important: extra evidence generation based on a real-world setting, plus a commercial agreement that exists, and that's all within the outcomes-based agreement. Sometimes you get asked this question, but let's be grounded here. What are outcomes-based agreements addressing? And a few key things. OBAs are a solution to address uncertainties that create barriers to timely patient access to therapies. They are not a replacement for clinical trials. I hear that often. They're not this. And they are not appropriate for all drugs. So when it's possible, simple market access agreements are always preferable. But when reaching a point that the uncertainties are so high and potentially impacting timely access to therapies, that's a great opportunity to look to outcomes-based agreements as a solution to support timely access. So why focus on outcomes-based agreement implementation? We need to remove barriers to OBAs by figuring out this how of implementation. I think I've spoken with Japan about this, but all the pieces are there. And in theory, I think we all know that OBAs are possible. We've seen examples from other countries. We are looking to move into that how to implement, and kind of debunk the myths that we have around OBAs potentially being that we need tons of resources to support these, or what is actually needed, and how can we make these work when required. So yeah, closing the gaps on what is needed to build the infrastructure to OBAs, and ultimately, when there is a need for an outcomes-based agreement, our goal is to have the infrastructure be there to support it and be ready to be able to enable these types of agreements. A failure would be having parties come together and say, look, we need these types of an OBA to support access to this drug and do this type of tracking in the future and ongoing, but not having infrastructure ready. And this is a quote, I just love it. It's from Dr. Phillips. He's based in the UK and has had a lot of experience on managed entry agreements and outcomes-based types of agreements, but it keeps me grounded. If you think agreeing to an outcomes-based agreement is hard, wait till you get to the implementation. That's the focus here. Based on all of that, since 2019, there is a working group that has been coming together, inspired by the opportunity for outcomes-based agreements, with the mission of advancing the opportunity for OBAs in Canada, and that's the benefit of all stakeholders in the Canadian healthcare system. So I'm going to present to you today some examples of the work that's been going on here. This group, you see the member companies above, they're established in 2019, and the scope is for all therapeutic areas, both public and private payer markets as well. And this group values inclusion and knowledge sharing and collaboration, and we invite participation and input from all relevant parties or interested parties in OBAs, and we, throughout all of our work in the past few years, we continue to reach out and integrate perspectives from different stakeholders. And there's an opportunity for you coming up in a moment. Just briefly, just touching up on 2 slides about OBAs in Canada, how many outcomes-based agreements there are in Canada. Of course, these agreements are confidential. Back in 2017, McKinsey put out a report saying that there were 16 innovative contracts in Canada, but really this is not a transparent space. What I look to do is conduct research on OBAs in Canada and seek to share opportunities on the learnings that we can get around their implementation and share any publicly available information broadly. So just a couple of themes in this Canadian story, because there are some steps being done towards outcomes-based agreements today. And this builds into the building blocks of how we're going to get to implementing there. But pieces of this puzzle are already coming together. I want to bring your attention to 3 things. So Quebec is leading with HTA recommendations that include a suivi clinique, so a clinical follow-up, RWE generation, and the potential for reassessment on pricing or listing at a future date. And interesting here, like to call your attention to the Quebec Life Sciences strategy that was established in 2017 that had 2 points in it that are really linked, in my opinion, to OBAs, which are there's support given for RWE projects and faster access to promising drugs. And we've seen some interesting recommendations come out of the NES on the 4 therapies that are mentioned there, Galafold, Spinraza, Luxturna, and Zolgensma, where it has this recommendation that has the clinical follow-up and RWE generation built into it. To be seen what will happen in the, down the road with the pair, if that will come to fruition, or how this type of recommendation is integrated. So interesting building block there for OBAs in Canada. Secondly, I think all of us know that Alberta has found a way of getting access, early access to the SMA drug Zolgensma, and I think this is quite unique in that at 6 weeks post NOC, there was a case-by-case listing announced. To be seen that's very quick compared to, I think I've heard Bill say 450 or even 600 days from NOC to listing in the past. So to watch that space and see, of course, this is a rare disease drug as well. And this brings me to my final point, is that rare disease really is leading the way, and we're seeing patient groups highly involved and vocal about the opportunity for outcomes-based agreements in this country, and we'll see a little bit more of that, I think, as we move into the future. With all new technologies and innovation, there is this idea of a tipping point. So we're going to reach a bolus, and then this type of approach may become more common. But I think what's important here today is that rare disease will likely be the tipping point, or will lead us to get to that tipping point for outcomes-based agreements. And right now, that's where we see the innovation happening. There is a need, there's high price, low patient population, and high unmet need for the drugs that are coming. So there's a big link here to outcomes-based agreements and the opportunity to support timely access. Okay, so let me take you through the building blocks of outcomes-based agreement implementation. And this is just a very brief overview of the work that the Real World Evidence and Outcomes-Based Agreements Working Group has been doing in the past 3 years. So back in 2019, the group looked to do some qualitative work and answer some high-level questions around when is it appropriate to have an outcomes-based agreement and what are the benefits for all parties. And as well, the group looked at patient support program infrastructure to collect outcomes data for OBAs. We worked on a few case studies and created some tools around how to do that qualitative analysis on when is a drug fit for an OBA, when is it appropriate, and how do we move forward with sort of changing our thinking to be able to start working towards outcomes-based agreements when appropriate. There's a lot of research on this available on our website, and I'll give you guys a link later. But I want to call out one piece that we found that was quite helpful, which is the 7-step outcomes-based agreement implementation process. So imagine starting, there's all of these pieces of the puzzle. It's a how can we put this into a framework that's going to help us move through the steps of when we find that a drug is appropriate to move forward with trying to put an OBA in place, how would we step-by-step approach this high level? So the group produced this, did the research and produced this high-level process. So it goes all the way from establishing if the drug is a fit for an OBA, and then taking step-by-step through negotiating the program, building the program, enrolling doctors and patients if there's a consent required, monitoring and reporting and adjudicating those agreements. And of course, finally, the OBA should not last forever. It needs to be reviewed annually or closed in certain periods. So this is a high-level process that's been established there. In 2020, we moved into a qualitative type of approach to look at using the tools that we created in the qualitative tools that we created to move into more of a quantitative research. So there's two initiatives that were done here. The first one was creating a decision modeling tool. So comparing an outcomes-based agreement versus a price discount contract or a PLA. And what we did with that model after created was scenario tested chronic disease, oncology, and rare disease. What this is a new approach with the ability to see what would that look like for a payer, for patients, and for industry if they were to approach a therapy or a drug with an OBA and a PLA. So you can see those modeling those two scenarios side by side, and it's really to aid in a decision-making process around OBA appropriateness. This is math modeling, and that was the approach used. I'll show you a little bit of the outcomes of that in a second. And then the second initiative we worked on was looking at Canadian Patient Support Program data capabilities. So PSPs, I think I've spoken before on them, is that there is an infrastructure that already exists, touching the patient, touching the doctor truly, and I think there's an opportunity in Canada to leverage this infrastructure and the data there to potentially track health outcomes to support outcomes-based types of agreements. So we were digging into that a little bit more. What are the capabilities that exist today, and what are the key insights that we got away around this potential source for RWE? Move back to the tool just briefly. The scenario modeling exercise that we did with the chronic oncology and rare disease drug. Just some high-level findings, and all this information is available to you if you'd like to go in and deeper on this. But really, the characteristics that made significant impact on the model results were the number of the patients on the drug's price, and then the cost to track outcomes-based agreements. Interesting enough is that the tracking cost was actually quite low, and I think when we ran some scenarios using patient support programs, the investment actually wasn't that large compared to what we would have thought at the beginning in terms of investment needed to support that type of data generation and tracking. On the Canadian PSP data capability survey side, there's 3 key learnings, and this is all available, so don't try to squint and go into those little charts, but 3 key things I want to call out is that 1, broad data collection is occurring today within patient support programs, already including RWE, and some leaders are collecting health outcomes data, biomarker testing data, and connecting their PSPs to EMR. So there's an opportunity there, and things are already happening in that space. Patient support program data are increasingly being leveraged for formal research and analysis, and that included linking to registries for HD analysis and to do publications or further research on what the drug is doing or what the impact the drug is having on the real world for patients in Canada. And finally, we see Canadian stakeholders gaining experience with PSP data use, and that includes linking to formal research initiatives. And so I think we're going to see more development in this in the coming year. Finally, in 2021, the group is continuing to work on outcomes-based agreement implementation. And I want to bring your attention to one project that we have on the go right now. It's a demonstration project on operationalizing outcomes-based agreement in Canada. And that is in collaboration with Dr. Winston Chung, who's based in Alberta and runs the O2 oncology data group out there. And what we're looking at, is it possible to create an OBA operational process? And we're looking at if health outcomes for oncology drugs can be tracked with existing databases, both using the O2 databases and using patient support program infrastructure. And we're determining how data tracking can be operationalized for the purpose of an OBA. So we're about halfway through this initiative and looked at 5 outcomes already using these 2 data sources. And just stay tuned. We will have some anticipated results later this year, and we will have an output of an OBA operational process design with some measurable health outcomes and data sources for everybody to think about if they're looking to do these types of agreements. Just 2 more minutes and then I'm done. I could see Duran jumping in. So yeah, overall, the building blocks of outcomes-based agreement implementation in Canada are on their way. We're putting the pieces together and trying to work together with all stakeholders to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to be able to support these agreements when appropriate and when needed. So finally, my call to action for everyone is that your help is needed to advance OB implementation in Canada. Another initiative from the group this year is that we're launching a survey on Canadian outcomes-based agreements experience and perception. This will be launched in July. 20 minutes, self-serve online, and there's some questions around general OB experience, readiness, data, and more. But we've worked with a number of external stakeholders to get their input onto shaping what should be included in this. We want to hear from you. What are your key barriers, and what key opportunities do you see, and where should everybody be in this process? It's open to patients, patient organizations, HTA, PCPA, public and private payers, clinicians, and academics. And all the results will be made publicly available. I will pop in the chat some information if you'd like to sign up to get that right to your inbox, and a couple more reports and research results from the working group. So I will leave it there. Bill?
Thanks so much, Allison. I think we should, with Durhan's thoughts, we should probably go right to the next panel, which is going to be mainly discussion. And I think that people are going to be making some reference back to these amazing presentations. So we're going to see that we've got some building blocks already happening in Canada. We've got some that can be imported from Scotland or wherever you are, Karen, right now. I think it's in Scotland. And Durhan, over to you to help us lead us through the next panel, and we'll keep the chat going in the meantime. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and certainly huge thanks to Karen and Allison. You overwhelmed us in terms of the breadth of your information presented, obviously in a very condensed form. So we appreciate that very much. And as Bill said, hoping that we can actually entice you to come back and speak with us in a much more, thorough fashion as we really try to figure out, Allison, how do we get these building blocks in place? And, Karen, how do we pull out what is happening, through Impact HTA, with the help of CADATH and INESA here in Canada. So yeah, can I ask the panelists for this panel to turn on their cameras? I've got Kevin, Thierry, Michael, and Hamara. Are you here? Yeah. My problem is that I think we can just put everybody. Angela, is there a way of putting all 4 of those panelists on the screen instead of Bill's face? I mean, Bill's lovely to look at, but really, I don't need his face during this entire conversation.
You just need to change your view. I see them as 4.
Oh,
Do you have it in gallery
Okay.
view? Yeah.
I put it on gallery view? Oh, that's everybody though.
And then you click hide non-video participants.
Oh, okay. God, we should know all this stuff by now, eh? I don't actually have that on my screen at the moment. It's okay. We can make it work. We'll kind of make it work. All right. So really huge thanks as well. So I think we're going to go right into the discussion, because what we've asked our panelists to do, and you had a very high level introduction to them, is to give us really in almost like a thumbnail sketch, like 3 minutes, kind of what they are doing and how they see this as contributing to a rare disease strategy, rare disease drug strategy. So without kind of much further ado, I'm going to just turn it right over to Kevin Quall, who I think kind of the question we were asking Kevin, speaking on behalf of rare blood disorders, what are the challenges, opportunities in advancing the diagnosis and therapies in rare diseases through the clinical research in Canada, certainly drawing upon your experiences with rare blood disorders.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Kevin Quall. I'm a rare red blood cell disease researcher at the University of Toronto. I'm stationed at the Toronto General Hospital with affiliation to Sick Kids and a number of other hospitals as well. I think in Canada that there's no shortage of expertise and ideas. I think at a local level, if you look anywhere in all the academic centers, you'll see that there's lots of research activities in rare diseases. The main issue I see, though, is that at least the part of the main issue is that we're dealing with a smaller population, obviously, let's say compared to the US, we're 1/10 of the population. And so even with the same prevalence of a disease prevalence for these rare diseases, it's still on an absolute terms a much, much, much smaller population. I think as a result of this, and the fact that our healthcare system is not necessarily a nationalized healthcare system similar to the UK. We are federalized, but also having, you know, really the main drivers of providing care is from the provinces, and this I think results in fragmented care, as well as fragmented research activities, and this also has led to, of course, the lack of infrastructural support. And I think what we need is a coherent effort from both the local, provincial, as well as federal level in supporting these research. And that's why I think a rare drug strategy is what we need. And just to illustrate why we need something like this, I started my journey as a faculty in the Department of Medicine 6 years ago, again, specializing in rare red cell diseases. And really, if you ask me to name all the diseases, is really hard, because I think what really sums it up is just look at all the participating organizations at NRBDO, at the National Rare Blood Disorders Organization. You see them there. I have dealt with those diseases. So anywhere from paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, that's 1 in a million, to things that are more.
Evan, I'm going to ask you to really kind of get to it, though, because I want to make sure we get everybody in terms of a presentation. So if we can really just condense it to kind of what the key point is in terms of the network.
Absolutely, yeah. So the NRBDO is there to further both finding treatment strategies, as well as improving the care for patients with these rare blood disorders. And I must emphasize that there is currently a lack of a coherent structure. And so as individual researchers, we've all been struggling with trying to partner up with industry, trying to get our ideas going and so forth. And so of all the studies I've done, 75% of them are partnered with some sort of industry, but most of these industries are in the US. While I must say that we have managed to bring 2 important drugs to Health Canada to be approved by Health Canada, it was actually quite a long journey. But I think the most important thing is to demonstrate to the government that we have the patient population, we have the need, and that we can provide them with the Canadian experience.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I think, again, this is one of the outstanding examples, as you say, of how you folks have been able to make that collaboration. So expanding beyond that a bit, I'm going to ask Terry to talk to us about MySRN, which is a very unique kind of a collaboration. Terry, over to you. I think we wanted to learn is kind of what was the vision behind MySRN? How does it fit into a national rare disease disease strategy and a drug strategy? So if you could give us a quick thumbnail on that, that would be great.
Yeah, sure, very quick. Thank you, Udran, and thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be part of this panel and this webinar. So MySRN is a federally incorporated nonprofit charitable organizations. We were founded more than 15 years ago now. It's joined 20 maternal child health research organizations and more than 25 affiliated practice-based research network across the country. The principal role of MySRN is to improve the quality and the impact of maternal and child health research through the provision of a coordinated infrastructure to support research teams working across Canada. In the space of rare disease, we have been, I think, quite active. For some of you must remember when we were thinking of putting forward an application for a network of Center of Excellence under the leadership of Kim Boycott and others. Some years ago, we actually housed a workshop in Vancouver for a couple of days, and unfortunately the proposal was not funded. It was a great proposal. More recently, we have been involved in supporting, and we are the house of the Rare Disease Model and Mechanism Network funded by CIHR, which is a very unique example of bringing fundamentalists and clinicians together to develop, model of disease in the preclinical area and then testing some drugs or medications. More recently, 3 years ago, when I took over from Anne Juncker, we went through an exercise, strategic priority, and we identified clinical trials infrastructure as the priority for MyCern. And over the last 3 years, we have built capacity in different domains to support multi-site randomized trial, whether it's industry funded or investigator funded. We work with different teams funded by CHR to provide either in-kind contributions or cost recovery services like data management system, monitoring, high-level coordination for project. And this is something where we are expanding, working with Health Canada. We have had a lot of webinar with Health Canada recently. We are very active in helping them in the Modernizations Act for clinical trials. Yesterday, we were actively involved in a webinar on a single patient study, which is really about rare disease. So we have excellent relations with Health Canada and other national organizations. So our aim is to go to expand and develop some kind of sustainability behind this infrastructure to support multi-site clinical trials. And of course, this opportunity in terms of fundings, could fit with that. There is also a commitment from the government to provide, $250 million for the clinical trials agenda to CHR, and we are lobbying and advocating to see some piece of this money targeting to pediatrics and clinical trials. So I hope that we will see more fundings going to an infrastructure to conduct those trials, bring more trials to Canada, be more attractive for industry, and working with our global partner in Europe and in the US, where there is also a very active process there in terms of rare disease clinical trials.
Well, huge kudos for the brilliant work that MyCern's been doing over the years and continuing to advance. It really does make us, a great opportunity, present a great opportunity for, as you say, those kinds of clinical trials and almost a one-stop shopping for, industry or any other kind of research network. So I'm going to pivot very quickly then to Michael May, who is going to give us a different sense of a coordinating network and really something that is key to, I think, what Health Canada and certainly we talk about, and that is an investment in being able to do research, but also the commercialization of that research into therapies and kind of what the role of the center is, and maybe an example of a success you've had. And I know there are many, in terms of what you're doing. So Michael, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dorhan. It's a pleasure to be involved in these in these court activities. Just to start out, as you mentioned, CCRM is a commercialization network, and cell and gene therapy is one of the hottest sectors in all of biotechnology, and many cell and gene therapy companies are using rare diseases as a launch or go-to-market strategy for their companies. And even despite COVID in 2020, there were record amounts of investment and pharma deals and IPOs in this space. So if there's ever a time to leverage a strategy and to demonstrate, economic benefit and health benefits of a rare disease strategy or something like cell and gene therapy, the time is now. And I use that as an entree to CCRM because our mission is to generate health and economic benefits in a sustainable way on the back of Canada's great scientific infrastructure in the space, and to do it through a public-private partnership, understanding that bringing together these key stakeholders is probably critical to kind of make this happen. And CCRM is a public-private partnership, and in the early days, we received 90% of our funding from government, and now only 10% of our funding comes from government. So we're on a road to sustainability, the rest coming from industry partnerships and from our own internal revenue generation. But CCRM at its core is a network of key stakeholders with an academic consortium, access to intellectual property and clinical infrastructure tied to an industry consortium where we get that market pull to balance the technology push from academia in creating therapies, and then have tied in there an investor network, because really everything that we're building is about ultimately leveraging private sector investment into company creation, technology development, and licensing. And so wrapped around those networks is a team, expertise, talent. We have 150 people. We'll be close to 200 by the end of the year, all focused on commercialization, gap filling infrastructure, and then strategic funding to take specific projects forward. So kind of mapped out a pathway that I think is probably similar to your strategy. Excuse me. But what I wanted to focus on is, in terms of that infrastructure for us, we've done had a lot of focus on manufacturing infrastructure. And the COVID pandemic has really shown us that logistics, supply chain access to therapies is a gap in Canada and many places in the world. And so for the last 10 years, we've been building capability to build manufacturing platforms. We have a clinical manufacturing site, and we're now working to build in Hamilton a commercial scale manufacturing facility to bring these to market. So in terms of successes, I mean, one that's really, we're a founder of a company called AvroBio, lysosomal storage gene therapy company. We exited from Avro, and we've actually used that exit to launch a for-profit subsidiary of CCRM, which is an investment arm, to again, build on our successes. But just one final thought, Darhan, is, I think everything we do and a lot of what Canada does in the academic world is, it's technology push. How do we come up with new therapies? How do we push them out? And I think when we think about infrastructure, we need to think about also how do we enhance the market pull, the adoption piece, and have those in balance. So when I think of adoption, I think, how do you tie together the patient journey with reimbursement, with logistics and supply chain, with manufacturing, which is of particular interest to us, because you need both of those to make this happen. And I think there are other places in the world, like the UK, that are doing this adoption piece very, very well. And we need to make sure we invest in that in Canada as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that very rapid journey through an amazing enterprise that you've got there. It really, I think, shows the capability, as you say, in Canada. And, we need to make sure that we've got also the investment. I mean, 10% is great in terms of public funding because it does speak to sustainability, but it would be even better if we had, even more investment in it, because that actually is important for Canada to have a genuine public investment in it. So good, kudos for you. So I'm going to bring us all the way back into the clinics now, and then into that patient world. And Hamira, you're going to talk to us about what is taking place within the Duchenne world and how Muscular Dystrophy Canada, but also with the other stakeholders, has really given us an example of a disease-specific infrastructure, well, more than just one disease, that I think can serve what we're talking about here, everything from the early newborn screening, diagnosis, all the way through to the monitoring and access to therapy. So over to you, Hamira. What is happening there, and how do you see this, kind of moving forward as we've got more? Well, we haven't got any therapies in yet for Duchenne, but we do have therapies that are in for some of the other neuromusculars, and very soon, hopefully, for Duchenne.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thanks so much, Darhan, for the invitation. And just want to build off what the other panels have already started to talk about. In preparation for this webinar, I was thinking about Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and then sort of started to draft an asset map. And I would say that it was very clear to me that we already have an infrastructure in place. I'll bet we can improve the efficiencies of that infrastructure. But when I was thinking about diagnostic and capacity and early detection, while we don't have newborn screening for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and of course, because we don't have treatments yet available and approved, there are mechanisms in place that we're looking for that. And actually, there is a clinical readiness. So we conducted a clinical readiness assessment it was in the context of SMA, spinal muscular atrophy, another neuromuscular condition that affects infants and young children. And it was very clear to us that across all provinces and territories, there was strong clinical infrastructure ready to go, so that should we implement newborn screening for these neuromuscular conditions, there is that pathway there. When we're talking about timely access to equitable and evidence-based care, I think the research is fantastic when it comes to Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's sort of actually the precursor to all of the things that I'll be talking about today, whether it be about access to complex care, enhanced community supports. The research is there. There's actually 13 active clinical trials right now in Canada for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is outstanding. What I also want to do is use Duchenne as an example to also highlight a network that Muscular Dystrophy Canada helped to support and fund together with CIHR. It's the Neuromuscular Disease Network for Canada. And so this is a new pan-Canadian network bringing together clinical, scientific, technical, and patient expertise with the goal of improving care, research, and collaboration. And Jesse's Journey is also partnering on this as well. And it's really clear to us using this network that we're able to build clinical expertise, train future neuromuscular clinicians, bring more clinical trials into Canada, really improve the clinical care there too as well. So again, just looking back at what you even showed at the beginning of the webinar across those 5 domains or those 5 steps, it is really clear to me when we take Duchenne as just one example of a rare disease that the infrastructure is there. And then to Karen's point, if we were, she mentioned that what was impactful for a patient drug submission is to follow a patient, a day in the life of a patient. And I think that if you were to follow a day in the life of a young boy or a young man affected by Duchenne muscular dystrophy, again, it would be really clear that we have an infrastructure in place. We have mechanisms where we're able to bring together the key stakeholders, and it's all about just improving efficiencies.
Thank you so much. That was so concise as well. And we really do salute, I think, at the heart of it, right? A patient community that has driven out and brought in all the stakeholders. So, great example as well. Really thank everybody for being so very concise in their comments as well. I'm wondering, Bill, whether we should open this up for everybody to come in and have sort of a large panel discussion. And maybe I would really love to have, both Heather and Deborah maybe provide a comment on what they've heard. And maybe if you don't mind, I know that Karen and Allison are still here with us, to whip it back to them as well, to give us a bit of a perspective from what we're talking about back to, mechanisms that would allow us to be able to bring in therapy. So, because I do want us to say, the focus for us obviously is getting a rare disease drug strategy in place, but the infrastructure obviously is essential in terms of making it work. So does that make sense, Bill? Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Heather to start. Oh, there you are. You're right there in the center of my screen. Over to you. And you may comment, as you wish, but really thank you so much for participating in this. And Heather comes with a really large amount of experience, and certainly in the cancer world where I first knew her, but certainly has been a real support in terms of rare diseases as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Darhane, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is an issue of both personal and professional passion for me, and so I'm delighted to be part of the presentations and listen to all the great content. So hard to summarize so much information from Allison and Karen in a quick overview, but what I came up with were really 5 themes. So I'll give you the headlines and then a few commentary beneath them, and then I'll hand it over to Deborah. So, number 1, relentlessly encourage the system to evolve. And if there's anybody in the system who has done that effectively, Darhane, you're always there, you're always present. There isn't a conversation about this really without you present representing patients. So I will say more, but relentlessly encourage the system to evolve. 2 is really create a state of readiness. 3, move when there's a tipping point. And I think we are at a tipping point in Canada like we haven't been in the past. 4, recognize the reality that some things have to happen in addition to the national strategy being in place. And I'll tell you a little bit about my thoughts there. And then 5 really is begin and end with what we are all here in the healthcare system for, which is for patients. Hospitals exist to accept and treat and look after and care for patients. Strategies exist in healthcare to provide the systems and networks for patients and caregivers. So let's keep our focus on patients and caregivers. So let's go back to the beginning, the first theme. Relentlessly encourage the system to evolve. So Karen's presentation, I was really struck by the data-driven, and we're an evidence-based driven organization at CADIF, but the data-driven approach to how bodies, organizations like CADIF and others elsewhere are really starting to look at drugs that go through the HTA process and where there's opportunities to evolve. And so I really picked up on the comments she made about equity, encouraging innovation, and ethical considerations. And all of those are things that in Canada, because of very unfortunately, some of the experiences that have come to light for many Canadians publicly and for families privately, equity is no longer something that can sit on the side of a desk. So those really stood out for me. In terms of creating a state of readiness, Alison talked a lot about templates and tools and mechanisms to really look at and be ready to implement outcome-based agreements, highlighted a couple of, opportunities and real changes that her work has seen in Canada, namely in Quebec, Alberta, and certainly in patients leading, which has always been something that's been important and we do really well in Canada. I would highlight, though, I think that Canada has a new story, and I think CADIF is emerging as a real leader in the RWE space. And I have had colleagues read all of the 20 Cents work, and there isn't much mention of kind of CADIF's leadership in the space. And I would tell you today that you're going to see that change. Three, when you think about the tipping point, you all know that the country is now looking at the potential for a national rare disease strategy. We've been somewhere like this before, but never quite like this before. And so I think it is a tipping point. About CADIF's RWE work a little bit, that we're launching a demonstration period and really starting to be practical and move this bar forward finally. To learn, to adapt and evolve, not just observe the complexity of the problem anymore, which is, I think, also something we've become exceptionally good at. Finally, in terms of the reality, I couldn't sit on this panel and not say that unless prices come down, we will continue to be plagued by difficult decisions in the healthcare system, both for rare diseases and common diseases. It is across the board. And then finally, when we think about patients and families, a lot of, what I heard from both presentations was compelling, but the video story is different from a flat piece of paper. It gives you a very different perspective on what life feels like, what the experience is like. And I think, we're making big changes at CADIF. We've always valued patient involvement. We always have a patient representatives talk about the patient experience and all the work that goes into putting a submission in. But the video experience of someone who's living with a disease is just a game changer. It's an entirely different thing. So I would end my comments by saying we should begin and end with patients and caregivers in mind, and Durhan always helps us do that. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much. And we have been delighted with the evolution of CADIF, as you know, and it really has been, I think, important in that respect. I mean, Deborah, I'm going to just punt it over to you to build on or to disagree or whatever you want to do, quite frankly. Deborah's one of my gurus, and I've known her for so many years, and I've seen her in so many and participated in so many settings. So I always know I can get a good, informed, but sometimes controversial opinion from Deborah.
I'll take that as a compliment. Thanks, Durhan. First of all, super thanks to everybody. Our presenters were amazing, and also everybody for being here. And thanks for giving me a word in on this, because I also very much feel passionately about this. I do not want to repeat Heather's excellent points. I think I agree with every single one of them, and lots of good things here. Let me bring a little bit of a different lens, maybe. I'm a health economist, for those who don't know me. So let me just put a slightly different lens, which I hope is very complementary to what's already been said. First of all, we have rare diseases, and all of you know rare disease is rare, but not when we look at it collectively. This is a huge disease. It's a huge concern, and it matters, and it should matter also to governments and payers and everybody else. So I think the message that comes from that, and one of the reasons why I love the rare disease community, is we have to continue to work together. because that's the way I think we can have the impact. So as I sort of jokingly say, sometimes it's a team sport, and we're going to get way further that way. So thank you for convening this session and all the great work, the amazing work that each of your organizations have done. Secondly, I think there's a lot of pieces in place already with all the work that you've done individually and collectively and nationally and internationally, et cetera. So maybe I'll just throw in a few other points. So I think we need to leverage all those, just like I think that's the intent here. But let me throw in a couple other things. Patients and caregivers, and I know this was said, but I'm going to re-underline that. I think we need to bring in patient preferences to this whole thing and their choices. And nobody who knows me would be surprised that I'm going to say that, because I think it matters so much in terms of timely access to diagnosis and treatment. And I know this is about a drug strategy, but in your 5 points, as you know, there's timely access to diagnosis. And the only way that a drug strategy, in my mind, can ultimately be successful is if we have diagnosis. And that's a really hard thing in rare disease sometimes. And I know from the work we and many other people have done, patients really value having a diagnosis because it matters in terms of paving the way to access to services of all sorts, whether it's education services, social services, drugs, or programs, or anything else. So this is also critical. The other thing is the overriding need for data. And one of the things all of us struggle with, I mean, yes, there's small numbers, not if we work together though, and think collectively, but also standardizing data collection. And some of the work we've been doing and trying to promote and support is to try to work together to standardize data collection efforts. And we've also had some things going on with the World Economic Forum calling in a mandate to say, let's work together, let's federate our data systems. Now, admittedly, that was driven a bit on the diagnostic side, but I don't see why we can't think across the continuum, across the life cycle of management, in not only the HTA process, but in everything rare disease. The other thing I wanted to highlight is equitable. So this has come up in many of the discussions so far, but in Canada, and this was said earlier too, we don't have a healthcare system, unfortunately. We need, therefore, also, I think, to standardize the approaches nationally in order to really make headway, particularly in the rare disease space. And I think that will help us reveal some of the inequities that have been happening and continue to occur for children and parents and caregivers with rare disease. And I think just to finish, linking then diagnosis, treatment, management, services in the health system, but even outside of the health system, i.e. social services, education, justice, all of those things. So that would be kind of my sort of synopsis in terms of a call for all of us. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words.
No, thank you so much, Deborah. Bill, I don't know if you want to take over and how we want to loop back in, because I want to take advantage of Karen and Allison as well while they're still here with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Kevin had a good question in the chat group. I thought, this is an opportunity for all the panels maybe to connect with each other. This is a great way to sort of cap things off with Deborah and Heather. But why don't we just have an open conversation, Durhan? We've got about 10 minutes left.
Yep.
And Kevin, you wanted to know, how Humira and Duchenne muscular dystrophy did what you did in terms of infrastructure. I don't know if Durhan, you're open for that kind of conversation, or you want to end it another way.
We can do that. I think that's valuable as well, right? So Humira, maybe you can. We know how you did it, but you can explain to us how it actually does work.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it short, but reflecting on your question, Kevin, I think it is really patients and families were at the core or the catalyst that helped to do this. I'm even thinking about the upcoming weekend. We have 2 patient organizations working together with this clinical neuromuscular network to get the clinicians, not just neurologists, but endocrinologists, cardiologists, all together to update the standards of care for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So I really think the patients and families were the catalyst and really to someone's point, the beginning and the end. To really help to improve. And sometimes the patient organizations have also been that convener of bringing all those key stakeholders together, leveraging all the expertise. And as Deborah mentioned, I think that early identification is important. In this case, in Duchenne, we don't have approved therapies, but even improving that level of diagnostic care, clinical care, access to those community supports, enhancing those community supports has been critical. But I would say it really just takes a lot of facilitation, convening, and then building from there, knowing that each of the different stakeholders brings so much to the table.
And don't forget the firefighters, your gorgeous firefighter calendars. That's amazing fundraisers. No, it is the patient community that has really, really dug down and say, we can fund this. It's the same as cystic fibrosis, right? We see these clinics and we say, wow. We see hemophilia and we say, wow. But we know the patient community comes together, and of course they're larger, so they can make it happen a bit more, right? But it really is, a lot of it is bottom up, and I think it's recognizing that.
Grassroots organization can only go so far though, and we see activism across different rare diseases, but we see disparate results.
Yeah.
And I'm a realist, and I hate to say this, and I think it really has to boil down to dollars and cents. Are there, money-making treatments available? I hate to say this, like hemophilia.
I don't know what you mean by mean money.
So I'll give some examples. Hemophilia has largely been a self-funded community for a very long time, and this is largely due to the fact that they can actually they can sell plasma and manufacture the factors prior to the advent of the artificial factors being available. Take eculizumab, for example. PNH was a largely neglected disease until eculizumab was available. And now we have a lot of patient activism, in that front, largely because we have resources. In a lot of communities like sickle cell disease, we have a lot of activism in that group, but we are hampered by the lack of funding. We have no resources, no money whatsoever to support the things that we want to do. And it's only recently, with the advent, again, with the focus of research in both industry as well as, in the government sectors on sickle cell disease, that we're able to make some headway.
It is that intimate relationship. Hamira said it earlier on, and that is we've got, the readiness in terms of screening, for Duchenne, but nobody's going to implement that until we've got a real treatment. But SMA jumped ahead of the line because you know what? We've got treatments, and we all know that, right? That's why the access to treatment is so important, right? It's an intimate relationship between having therapies, as you say, therapies that bring in research dollars, bring in access monies and investment in order for the other parts to take place. So it is very much the case. And Heather said, the other side of it, and that is the pricing's got to be such that it's going to be affordable, but we also recognize that it also drives in a great deal of investment. So it's looking for those kinds of balances, I think, that are so important. But you're absolutely right. The disparity has a lot to do with, where's the investment coming from? And is there the opportunity to actually do that investment? So that's a really great point. But not to take away from the fact that these are communities, though, that invested a lot themselves and families and, really built that, kind of network, right? Bill, I'm sorry.
Could we go global a bit and maybe turn it back over to Karen? And because I think, Kevin, you bring up a really good point about, we want to build the infrastructure. We already have a lot of the building blocks. I think, Karen, you gave us some of the plans for how to do this from an HTA perspective. In Europe or elsewhere, Karen, have you seen how that infrastructure can be built? Does anything that Kevin said resonate or make sense? And how has that been overcome in Europe from your perspective?
absolutely see the same situation where when there is a new treatment being developed, there's more investment per se. But I'd like to be a little bit more positive and pick up on Heather's point about the value of multi-stakeholder input and us all recognizing what we can do. So we're quite clear that we don't want our report to be saying, here, HTA bodies, this is what you need to do. Within that report, we make recommendations to everyone about how we can improve a fair determination of what value is of a rare disease treatment. And that includes the best trials from industry, etc. And I think that's really important. And what I see is that good patient groups can be the honest broker of bringing together multidisciplinary collaboratives, and then the money comes when we, and the important thing is to invest the money wisely. So my best example again comes from Duchenne, the Hercules project, which many of you will know, where a parent of a child with Duchenne worked in a pharmaceutical company for a product that did not go forward, but said to the company, can I take the economic modeling and share it publicly? And actually, we need more cross-company work. We need much more transparency. We need to stop doing things in silos in a lot of way. And so what that collaborative has done is create a specific PRO. We've got new models which have totally changed because of patient input. And so I want to see more cross-company working at the very early stage so that we can have infrastructures that make appraisal and determination of value more efficient.
Yeah, Michael. Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to find my unmute. I think, new commercial models are going to be required. And it's not just about in the classic, say, pharma where, shareholders or investors are getting a return on their investment. We need to demonstrate a return on the investment of multiple stakeholders, both public and private, across the ecosystem, and everyone can get a return so that we have sustainability. It's just, tweaking those models differently. And when I was listening, across, say, life sciences in Canada, we have a challenge that we're a small market. So, getting big investment in a small market is hard because we can't sell these products in Canada at any large degree. But so what we need to do in Canada is have a niche contribution to life sciences in the world. And I think it's around being a great demonstration market. So leveraging our infrastructure, which is exceptional on the clinical side and in basic R&D and manufacturing and others, that extends wonderfully to rare diseases where, let's not fight it. How can we be a great demonstration market for global export consumption of our innovation in partnership with other smaller countries that are also, very innovative and have great infrastructure. That's what we should be targeting here is, don't fight the market size, embrace it and do what we do best with that and export it and be global leaders. That's what I would say.
Take our, challenges and make them into the opportunities. Terry, I can't help but really want to get you to come in and talk about, responding to what Mike was saying in terms of, how do we leverage, and I know your clinical trials network tries to do that as well.
We try to leverage at different levels. We work with networks that go to CHR to see whether we can use the science project to actually enhance the infrastructure. So that's one way. The second way is to attract industry fundings, and we are actively working on that. It's true. Industry doesn't really want to come to Canada for clinical trial, not because we don't have the infrastructure or we don't have the populations. I think we have actually a lot of strengths around that. What determine them or limit them in their ability to come to Canada is the complexity of our system in terms of regulations, ethics review, contract, and the fact that the healthcare system is under the province, whereas the research is under the feds. And then, of course, which is really for me one of the most terrible thing is that they tend to come to Canada to do trials, but once the product has been assessed as efficient and safe, and they get their marketing authorizations at the FDA and the EMA, they don't actually put forward an applications to Health Canada. So we contribute in terms of participations to trials, but we don't have actually the labellizations of the drugs because they are not willing to put forward an applications, which is really unfortunate. And we need to find a way to avoid that. And I don't know what, there is not simple solutions, but this is the reality. There are a lot of drugs approved elsewhere that we cannot get in Canada, or we have to go through the special access program or others, pathway, which is not right. I think this is really a problem.
So we are right at the 2:30, Bill. And I don't want to, keep people because I know people drift away, but I think that's a great finish, Terry, to come back to saying we need is a wraparound solution. I mean, that's why we're saying the rare disease strategy is part and parcel of a drug strategy. It goes back to what Kevin was saying. We need to reinvest. We need to make sure that if we're doing this, that the investments come back. And I think a bit of what, Michael was saying as well. I mean, AVROBIO to me is a great example of how it can be done right. Clementia, which has developed a treatment for FOP, sold that off to, Ipsen, which is now bringing the drug back in a commercial way and reinvesting in Canada. So, those are the kind of models, right, that we want to see, but we need to make sure that we've got those processes that are going to not only streamline the clinical trials, but also streamline the accessibility, and again, this is why it's necessary, right? So, I mean, we are a small country. I mean, that means that we ought to be able to work closely together. And, Maestrin is really a great example of how that already works. And I listened to, what Allison's talking about in the pilot projects, demonstration projects. I mean, it shows how we can do that, right? And we can be nimble and we can take advantage of, I think, the fact that we are small. And for the most part, we all kind of like each other. We don't have huge, kind of, challenges there. I don't see a whole lot of, political, divisions. I mean, Hamir, I know you see it in your community. It's not like, okay, I'm out in Edmonton and I need to have this, or Calgary's this and Vancouver's this. It's one community. And I think that's kind of the beauty of what Canada is, and the best of, and certainly for me, again, Maestrin represents some of the best of that, right? So, we can take advantage of that. Bill, I'll leave it to you to maybe wrap up for us and then we'll talk about next steps.
Yeah, thanks very much. This has been fantastic. Just last thing, building on Karen, what you said, patient organizations can be the honest broker. The civil society, they're mission driven. In fact, this webinar is an example of that. And we need to do more of this kind of thing. I mean, Heather, you mentioned about 20 cents in the report and how, the next report is hopefully going to include what CADITH is doing. But that's not going to happen unless we get on a panel together and talk it through. So, and then Thierry, in terms of, what's giving companies pause to come to Canada, that was the last webinar we had in many ways. But this webinar talks about, what we can do to build a system that will actually work for everybody, to actually bring products through the system, understand the data, what works, make sure patients are there at the beginning and the end. And so, this was such a great way to cap off the 4 webinar series, Durhan.
Yep.
And lead into the next 2. And thanks very much for everyone coming from across the country and overseas as well.
Yeah, again, thanks to everybody. That was amazing series of discussions. We could probably have done this for another hour, at the minimum before people really got too restless, because I think we're in the midst of some great discussions here. As always, Karen says she's happy to come to Canada anytime. I hope that's in person as well as virtually. So, we'll look forward to that. We'll make it happen soon. Canada is going to be a safe haven pretty soon. We need to, we're getting there, right? So I think this is happening. So we really look forward to this. We've got 4 work streams that I've put out there. We're going to look forward to bringing people in. We haven't figured out exactly how we're going to do them, but I think we'll do some roundtables. We'll do some think tanks that will help us there, and we'll absolutely do some more webinars. So thank you folks ever so much for doing this. Nobody's off the hook, because I'll call on you again to come back. And we really cannot tell you how much we appreciate it. And certainly huge thanks to Karen. I know you had a full day and you just came out of a taping. She said to me, oh, good, it's the end of my day. I can get rid of all my other work that I've done all day and then come into your webinar as well. I thought that was such a wonderful way of saying it, instead of saying, oh my God, I've got a full day and I got to come in, at the end of my day in the middle of supper time to do this for you. So huge thanks to you as well. So we'll see you all in the near future, you'll get some updates for us, and do look for the recordings and everything. And at the end, my thanks to Bill as always for all the support in doing this. Thank you, folks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Doreen.
Bye.
and Bill.